In my previous videos, I mentioned this deep scarlet from Daniel Smith. You can see my paint experiment where I tested several desaturated reds, and this particular pigment or color impressed me because I kind of thought it could possibly be used instead of a warm red on a palette, especially if you don't care for very bright reds, you're interested in more natural palette. So I created this swatch chart where I mixed several reds that I'm thinking it can be substituted, or I kind of imagine them giving me very similar mixes, and some of them are more bright, very pigmented, some slightly cooler, like I started with this Pyro Red from Daniel Smith, and then Permanent Red from Daniel Smith. That's another on a cooler side of red, that's slightly transparent, a Pyro Scarlet, a Deep Scarlet, and then lastly the Queen Burnt Orange. So right there on the top line you see all the color swatches. Of course there's differences in between them, from warm to cool to desaturated, but you can see in the mixes the differences are somewhat minimal. So if you would like this color, you can have it on your palette. You don't have the fear of missing out on particular color or creating different missing on creating specific shades. So the way I created this chart, and I did this a little bit backwards, first of all I applied the color that's written right here on the left column. So the first one was the Squin Violet from Winsor & Newton. So I start from the left edge and kind of create a gradient, and then on top of it I apply the color. So in this case would be the Deep Scarlet, and mix it on the paper. I notice I get a little bit more interesting results, and you can vary the intensity of the paint, especially since I apply it first on the left edge and then kind of move out, have it a little bit more watered down, clean my paintbrush, and then somewhat mix it towards the end. Another benefit of this Deep Scarlet, and I can zoom you in just a little bit more, and you'll see this color as they dry out. They're very impressive. The Deep Scarlet, it's one of the most transparent of all these reds, and it dries in a more concentrated form. It dries really nice. In the swatch I had, I said, yeah, I could see it replacing my Pyro Scarlet, if not the Pyro Red or the Permanent Red. The next color I plan to mix is this Cobalt Violet from Winsor & Newton. It's a very pale color and I almost ran out, so let me go get a little bit extra. So I was able to create a wash with my Cobalt Violet. Unfortunately the tube I noticed it starts to dry up in a tube, so I'll probably have to squeeze it out in a pan and just have it dry up in a pan. It's much easier to use than if it dries in the tube, and then you probably have to do some surgery, open up the tube. I try to use less of the main color, like the Deep Scarlet, when I mix with the color that's so light value, and it doesn't really matter. You can see even here the Cobalt Violet tends to make its way because of the granulation, and if you mix with the Pyro Red, you can see the violety clumps of color there. I chose the Rose of Ultramarine. I try not to use in these mixes colors that have more than one pigment, especially if the pigments are from different color families. Like Rose of Ultramarine, it's a PV19 and a PB29, so a blue and a violet. But I just wanted to compare it with the rest of the violet colors, because in case you would like an interesting violet on your palette, like instead of just a plain one pigment, cobalt, queen violet or cobalt violet, rose of ultramarine, and the mixes are similar. There's not much of a difference. The granulation comes through the PB29, the ultramarine. The violet doesn't do much, but on all the mixes, because these are warmer reds, they don't create anything spectacular. I believe only the pyro red, if you look in this top corner, created a very interesting burgundy wine color. And I'm trying to adjust the light, but not interesting enough that I could say, oh, I have to have it. But yeah, here it is. Rose of ultramarine mixed with the deep scarlet. Next is the Queen Magenta, and this is the Winter Newton, a PR122. Very nice and bright color. And most of the times you won't get a significant different color or new color when we mix in the same families, like this pink and red, or warmer red with cooler red. But every once in a while, if you plan to paint a wash and you don't necessarily need a flat wash, you want some variation, some interest, mixing colors that are close together will give you that effect, will create a more interesting wash than just a plain one color wash. And we'll see when this dry, but it looks very interesting so far. Probably one of my favorite is this red rose deep mixed with the pyro red, which they're very close. The red rose deep, it's more on the pink side, but mixed together it created enough variation that it gives it some interest, but it's not as different as you can create some confusion with your color mix. Talking about red rose deep, I bought a tube of this paint, and I'll probably use it when I'm creating a palette. I have the Daniel Smith Quinacridone Rose in my rainbow palette, and I believe it comes with their introductory set of split primary. But I mentioned this in other videos. There's something about this particular PV19 from Da Vinci that makes it more appealing to me as cool red or even a magenta color in the palette. And here you can see again, these colors are in the same family, in the red family. Put them together, you don't see much of a change. Here I added a little bit too much water, so I won't get a very nice wash. And this paper, it's a Canson XL. It's a cellulose paper, so the colors, I feel like they just sit on top of the page. They don't do much. But we'll see once this dry if it evens out a little bit more. Perinon Orange is the next color I'm mixing with, and I bought that particular pigment when I created my rainbow palette based on Dr. Otto Cano here on YouTube. She has very good educational video about understanding colors, pigments, creating palette, choosing colors. So when in doubt, check out her channel. Very good advice. So far, this Deep Scarlet, I can compare it even with the Pyro Scarlet. I would have it on my palette as a substitute, especially since I believe it feels more transparent. We'll see how the swatches dry, but so far I'm very impressed. The next color I saw Indolin Yellow. It's semi-opaque maybe, but I love this color. It's, to me, reminds me of sunflower petals or even marigold. Very rich yellow, and so far in mixes I really enjoyed it. I put it in a palette wanting to complete the sketchbook. Was part of me following Graham Booth, I believe, street scene paintings. He came up with this book that gives tracing guides for different street scenes, and he teaches different techniques. I was planning to work my way through that book and have a specific watercolor palette. So this ISO Indolin Yellow, I thought is gonna be a good addition. Maybe it's a little bit too bright for street scenes, but then sometimes you need a little luminosity, even in a street, in a city kind of landscape. I chose the yellow ochre and Naples yellow because they look in hue similar to each other. I tend not to use yellow ochre as much in my paintings. So I was wondering if I wouldn't have a yellow ochre on my palette, but I choose to have Naples yellow, if that would be sufficient, if I would miss anything with mixing the colors. And I have the Daniel Smith Naples yellow, which has some white mix in it, but so far I really enjoyed the colors mixing with it, and I can see why certain people prefer white mix in their watercolor, because you just cannot, even if you water down these colors, you're not gonna get that luminosity, that glow. At least to me, this kind of colors are very appealing to me, and I'm gonna zoom out in a little bit just to appreciate that. And the difference between yellow ochre right here and Naples yellow, you can see these two columns. I would much prefer the mixes done with the Naples yellow. The yellow ochre is not bad, especially this quinacridone burnt scarlet. I think it's a very nice brown, but much more interesting. And this is counterintuitive because Naples yellow has three pigments: a pigment white, yellow, and red. So yeah, this kind of gives us the idea that in order to know your color, you have to play with them just by looking at the information or at the pigment number. You cannot always tell how they're gonna react, how they're gonna mix, what results you're gonna get. And this is a Gamboge Lake Extra. It's an All Holland paint. I bought several All Holland tubes. I wanted to try them out. I like their Golden Baroque Red. It's a one pigment. It's similar to Alizarin Gold from Da Vinci. So that color almost looks like this Deep Scarlet mix with Gamboge Lake. Very nice burnt orange. Of course, I had to include, oh, I have too much stuff here on the ground. I had to include the quinacridone gold. I'll probably have this color in all my palettes. It could probably complete all my yellow needs. So very dark. Then it waters down to a very light yellow. This is the Daniel Smith quinacridone gold. Now I have to adjust my camera since I'm running out of space here. And I've noticed mixing with all these three yellows, the Gamboge Lake, the Queen Gold, and I have the Arlight Yellow from Da Vinci. The results are very similar, so honestly you only need so many yellows on your palette. I didn't include a lemon yellow just because I don't tend to paint much with that color, so I usually won't have it on my palette, but I have a green gold and you'll see the results. They're very interesting. You can see this bottom row, very interesting brown, reddish browns. Even on my Da Vinci paint, the Aerolite Yellow is one of the least used paints. For some reason, even in florals is not a color that I choose, although I believe it would be really nice as an underpainting for yellow flowers. It would give them a nice glow. So Deep Scarlet for my paint experiment, it turned out to be the perfect pigment. It layered really well, and also it was a non-staining, or at least I was able to lift it really easy off my paper. And then I just loved the hue, loved everything about this color. And I'm almost finished. Green gold. I like to use this in landscapes much more than the May greens. I believe it's more natural, and it kind of, to me, reminds me of sun coming through the leaves. You can use it for fall landscape, so it's much more versatile than a May green. But it all has to do with preference. I try to leave the more concentrated part of the pigment on the left and have a little bit of the mixing color on the right. But overall, this is just to give me an idea of how this will turn out. if I found something I like to further experiment with, I'll probably just pick those two colors and create a more in-depth swatch. And last but not least, I have Denise's green. And we know green and red are complementary. Depending on the shade of green, like how close it leads to yellow or blue, you get more brownish or grayish colors. So far, none of these mixes are appealing to me. And of course, I didn't put too much effort in getting like even gradients or trying different concentrations or ratios of paint. But for most part, I can say mixing Denise's green with any of this color would give me some sort of brown. Which, if you can think about it, you could probably create a whole landscape just using two colors. Any of these reds and green. And you could cover anything from flowers and any interest object that are red, green of the grass, and then brown like a tree trunk or dirt. So these are the warm colors. I also selected several blue colors. We let it dry and then we'll come back and see which one you like best. And on this second page, I mixed 4 of our reds with a selection of green and blue colors. It's mostly different kinds of blues with different properties, and I have at the bottom of a page, let me figure out how to show you this, 2 violet colors, but I'm gonna start swatching this deep scarlet from Daniel Smith. This is the color that kind of intrigued me during my paint experiment swatches, and I was very curious to see if it can replace the warm red on your palette. A beautiful desaturated red. Next to it right here is the Quinaclo Burnt Scarlet, that tends more to a reddish brown, but from comparing it in mixes with the more saturated red, there's very little difference. The main thing you can see right here with these turquoise colors, horizon blue and cerulean, you can definitely see it becomes more like a brown color, but not that much different than the Pyro Scarlet, which is the warmer of the bright reds. So here's the deep scarlet, and I probably used a little too much water. The first color here I mix it with is the Perylene Green from Daniel Smith, and this is the only Perylene Green I have. I'm trying to get to my palette. I have all my colors spread out in different palettes. Some of them are still in a tube, not squeezed out anywhere. I'm still debating if I should create one of those massive palettes you see people on YouTube putting together just so they can see all their colors at once. I might be brave one day and try and do that. So this is how I'm doing these mixes. I try to put down a layer of color, and let me move my water so you don't see my hand crossing over. I put down one of the colors, and then I add a layer of my colors on top, and I'm mixing on the paper. I try to do different variations, concentration, lighter areas. What I've noticed mixing with this Perylene Green, only the Pyro Red right there towards the end gave me almost like a desaturated violet, but that's the cooler of the reds, and right here towards the end I would call it almost like a sepia brown. Of course you can mix it more and have the color more homogeneous, but that's kind of how it goes. And I'm gonna zoom in a little bit more. Oh, that should be better. Next one I have the Cenelia green. It's a PG36, a very warm green, or I should say a more balanced green. It does have a little bit of texture. I wonder if that's because I'm using it straight from the tube. I wonder if I let these paints dry, if I get a better smoother color. But so far, this in all the mixes, you can notice a little bit of a texture. Might pick up on this by now, but green is not my favorite color. For somebody who wants to paint landscapes, that's a bit counterintuitive, but yeah, I guess it's just finding the right shade of green. This is the phthalo green. I have PG7 from Schminke. Very bright, transparent color. I do like it in mixes. I feel like it's one of those colors that get very easily washed out. Probably I'm using too much water just to counteract its brightness, but it does give me beautiful soft grays, especially with the cooler reds, and more warm. Oh, here it's almost like a brown, like very interesting sepia, I would call it. But definitely green and red, they're complementary colors, so somewhere around the warmer red and this very cool green, you could probably find the color that would perfectly neutralize the reds. Next on my list is the Caribbean blue, and I have this pigment. It's a PB16. This one is from Old Holland. I have one from Da Vinci, but I chose just for variety's sake to use this pigment and this brand, Old Holland. I like some of their mixes. They do have very interesting color mixes. When I was looking to sample them, I tried to get single pigments, and especially pigments that I don't have and you don't see them as often or not at all in other brands. Like I have a golden baroque red. It would come up in my paint experiments. Very nice, warm orange, desaturated orange, I would say. But this Caribbean blue and deep scarlet, I feel like they perfectly neutralize each other. This is almost a black. Very nice. And Caribbean blue is transparent. If you find phthalo blue green shade in any brand a little too strong, I would definitely recommend this Caribbean blue. I believe it's similar, you'll see it in mixes, and it's not so overpowering, especially if you have a moderate tinting palette. It's still a strong color, and probably if I use it more concentrated, it would definitely show that it can reach some darker values. Turquoise green, and here I try to add a selection of light blue colors. So these pigments straight from the tube. And even with layering, they will never gonna get like higher values. They are very light colors, very pretty. They have granulation properties, except for the horizon blue, and you'll see it next. You can see my column there, but I want you to be able to appreciate, especially with these granulating colors, once they'll dry, you never know where the pigment is gonna settle, how the base color is gonna look. I do enjoy looking at this turquoise green mixed with the pyro red and with permanent red from Daniel Smith. You get very soft pinks, very beautiful granulation. With mixed with the warmer reds, here we kind of go into the browns. I don't find them particularly interesting. So just so you know, if you want to add a warm red to your palette and you want some more clean mixes, I'll go with a cooler reds. If you're more into a natural looking palette, then the warmer reds or the Scarlet will give you some interesting browns. This pigment here, or paint rather, is Holbein Horizon Blue. I bought it before I knew enough about watercolor and what I prefer in watercolor to really make an informed decision. So it has a PW6 and it's a blend of PB15 and PG7, and I hardly ever use it just because of its opacity and my preference for using blues that lean more towards violet. But because of the white, you can see the color mixes tend to be very opaque and have that pastel feel about them. Not as interesting as the two colors they are mixed with the granulation. Still, if you prefer a non-granulating palette, this would be a good substitute if you like the cerulean blue or the turquoise. So this horizon blue will definitely feed the need for that hue in your palette, and your mixes, especially mixed with another non-granulating colors, are gonna be very soft, very even. This is cerulean blue. I have the Winsor & Newton one, and I just squeezed them from the tube a few minutes ago, and it's already hardened. So that's one thing about Winsor & Newton paints. I noticed they harden very fast, and I live in a relatively humid climate, like about 75% humidity. At least that's the day, so it's not most of the time. Very beautiful blue. Again, I prefer more warmer blues that tend towards violet, so you'll see some of my favorites coming up next. But it did give me some very nice granulation, very similar to the turquoise blue, but especially because it's cerulean, it's slightly cooler, mixed with the cooler reds. I think these are more harmonious mixes. I like that. They balance each other out. It's not such a big contrast, and you avoid some of the brownish color. You get almost like a violet. So here's our deep scarlet mixed with the cerulean, and cerulean doesn't have a high tinting strength, and I think I might have used a little bit too much of the scarlet. So sometimes I just go back and forth, adding a little bit of the color until I feel like I got something in between, like a good mix. I'm gonna pause you for 1 second to move the camera. And the next mix It's a phthalo blue green shade, very intense, very bright color. I used to love this color, and then I realized it was just too overpowering, and it's staining, so if you make a mistake, it's gonna stay in place. It's very hard to remove it. But in mixes, especially with the permanent red, it created a very beautiful violet. Not so much with the pyro red, maybe because of the opacity of the pyro red. I didn't enjoy that, or I don't particularly prefer that. Although with this swatch, I might have used a little bit more water. And you'll notice with certain pigments, if you use too much water, or if you add water later on, you end up with all your pigment kind of sitting at the edge of your puddle, and then a very washed out color in the middle. So I did that with this mix here. Yeah, for this deep scarlet, it almost looks like they neutralize each other, creating a nice dark. But I'm gonna add just a tiny bit of the deep scarlet, see if we can get a desaturated violet. And again, if you use too much water, you get that effect where your pigment kind of migrates at the edge. Cenelia Blue, it's a PB15 column 6. It's a phthalo blue red shade, and I really like this. I feel like this is the point where I really appreciate blues. I haven't used it as much, maybe because I have it only in a tube form. I should add it to a palette to have it on hand. I really enjoyed the violet it created with the pyro red. With the pyro scarlet, of course, my mistake, but I don't think the color is that interesting. I think it's more desaturated. Because of course pyro red, it's a warm red, it has enough yellow in it, so you have a little bit of all the three primary colors, so you're probably gonna get a brown. The deep scarlet, I really like it, how it looks so far. Although it looks warmer, some of this pigment, they're just gonna react differently in the mix. So don't go so much about how they look in mass tone, actually mix them to figure out the color that's gonna result. And of course I had to include French ultramarine. And for the longest time I thought the red shades of the phthalo blue are very close to ultramarine, but they're just a little bit too cool, so I could never really replace a French ultramarine, especially when it comes to the hue. And it's actually right at this point where it's very likely you're gonna get a violet mixing with almost any kind of red. Maybe not this quinacridone burnt scarlet. This is still acting almost like a burnt sienna in the mix. Although I do use a lot of burnt scarlet, so you can see right here towards the end. And I'm a little bit off camera there. Let me move you up just a tad. You can see right here. Very, very interesting things going on. So burnt scarlet on my palette. Yeah, could almost replace a burnt sienna. Probably I wouldn't get a very dark color, but I still can get a nice gray. Let me add just a bit more deep scarlet here. And this French Ultramarine by Daniel Smith, it does have some granulation, but not too intense. You'll see it next in comparison to one of my favorite granulating blues, the Cobalt Blue Deep from Winsor & Newton. And you can definitely see on this row all the nice blue granulation and the red mixing somewhat with the finer pigment, but for most part just settling in the background. And this Cobalt Blue doesn't have a very high tinting strength. Most granulating colors, I would say they have a similar property, since they don't really change that much the color you're mixing it. The pigment kind of stays on its own. And you can see in the initial phase, you think you would get a nice even color, but then as it dries, the pigment is kind of doing its own thing. Next on the list is my favorite blue of all times. I have the Draconoid blue from Ember. And it's one of the colors I like to paint because it gets so dark and desaturated, but it mixes. I haven't really seen how it shines, or maybe I haven't mixed it with the right colors. I think because it's a desaturated blue, it will never make a really nice violet unless I mix it maybe with a Queen Rose. But with all these warm reds, maybe like a natural violet, and with the burnt scarlet here, it's almost like a umber, like a burnt umber situation going on. It also has a high tinting strength, so you have to be careful what color you're mixing it. Make sure you have enough of the color. So right here, I probably added too much water and not enough pigment, but I can still see what color are we gonna get. It looks like a very desaturated violet. Right here at the bottom, this is probably one of my favorite violets. The Smalt from Winsor & Newton, and I have it here in my drawer on a palette I put together some time ago that I never really used up, which I don't know if we ever use up a palette, because I feel like certain colors we think we're gonna get a lot of use out of it, but then they just stay on our palette unused. So that's why I'm debating if I should have all my colors in pans. But I do like to paint on a big surface, so maybe full pans. And then once I figure out the colors to use in a big painting, I can always pour them on a large palette and mix them as needed. So yeah, this is smalt granulating violet. You would create a very fine granulation. I would think because it's already a violet, I would get some interesting violet colors mixing with these reds. But to me, it's very desaturated, somewhat interesting, unusual almost. I'm not sure exactly what I'm gonna use a shade like this, but very nice to look at. Last but not least, I had to include the dioxazine violet. And again, because these are warm reds, mixing it with a violet, it doesn't always guarantee that you would get a nice violet. And since at least two of them, the pyrrole colors, are somewhat opaque, you lose the vibrancy of a pure dioxazine violet. I'll let this dry off a little bit, and I'm gonna zoom out. I'm gonna look at some comparisons, see some common attributes, and hopefully will help you decide what colors you want to add to your palette. And here are the two color charts side by side. Looking at them together, I cannot believe the amount of colors that can be obtained by mixing everything. And of course, right here in the edges, the burnt scarlet, just as expected, somewhat desaturated colors, but still beautiful, very natural. So all the burnt scarlet here and the burnt scarlet on this side. A major difference between these colors, definitely in this section, mixing with the light greens, more desaturated, close to a brown, especially the warmer the red gets, or as much more yellow it has in it. Very pretty and bright for these two mixes here. I did like all the Naples yellow mixing, so if I had to choose between adding a yellow ochre or a Naples yellow to my palette, I would go for these Naples yellows from Daniel Smith, because I really enjoyed how soft the colors look. Maybe not as transparent as mixing with this yellow ochre for Winsor & Newton, but overall very pretty. Another one that kind of stands out is this Pyrrole Scarlet and Arlite Yellow. Very soft peachy color. I can bring it closer to the camera. Right in here, almost like a perfect orange. You could probably use it in fruit painting and florals. For the warm part of the mixing chart, my favorite was the Pyrrole Scarlet by Daniel Smith. I can see why it was included in the primary set. But when it comes to the cool colors, comparable, I would say, except for these lighter blues, and then everything else looks about the same. So Pyrrole Scarlet, I would say, most versatile of all the colors. It mixes really well, except for this particular area. And then Pyrrole Scarlet and all the other, if you look into a Deep Scarlet or a Queen Burn, I would say very similar, especially with this blue part. Maybe right here towards the end into the violet mixes, not as saturated, but not enough of a difference to say you have to have a Pyro Scarlet. So if you like a more of a natural red, you can go with either Deep Scarlet, Queen Burn, Scarlet from Daniel Smith. I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, our granulating colors, cobalt violet and or turquoise, green, the PG50, and the cerulean blue, and this beautiful cobalt deep, and even the smalt create a very interesting granulation, with our star being this cobalt blue deep. Overall very nice, and I think these two are still drying up. Let me know if you want to see videos like this. I hope you had fun, and I'll see you in my next